Hello, how's everybody doing today? It is September of 2024. We're in the fall semester. I am Anthony Balzano, professor of anthropology and sociology, and we're here today to give lecture for chapter 2 of the human story for introductory anthropology. And it's a beautiful day out, although I'm inside. I'm in my office here on campus. We are at Sussex County Community College in Newton, New Jersey. And if you have any questions about this recording, you can email me at abalzano@sussex.edu. Now, today we're going to talk through a short lecture on Chapter 2 of the human story called Doing Anthropology. And in this chapter, what the authors do here is to talk about how anthropologists go about their business, how they actually collect data. It's all about data, right? How they go out and get their data, make their observations, collect their evidence, collect their artifacts, collect their fossils, listen to people, make their recordings, collect their notes, do their surveys in various ways. So we'll use the same model that we, in fact, talked about in chapter 1 about the four fields: cultural anthropology, biological anthropology, archaeology, and linguistics. And we'll look at each of those fields and how anthropologists in those fields actually do their work. But there's a case study in this chapter that's really interesting, and it's about the Banaba people who lived in a small island northwest of Fiji in the Pacific, in the Central Pacific. And what happened in the 1940s is everybody who lived in Banaba was removed and relocated to Fiji. And what the case study is about somebody doing research among those people who were removed, who would love to have gone back to the island of Banaba. It's a really interesting case study because what it does is it illustrates a study of the colonial period in the mid 20th century, where people were forcibly removed by governments. They were removed largely because the island was basically one big phosphate mine. Okay, and so when they removed people, they started to remove phosphates, and phosphates are used. Well, at that time, they were largely used for fertilizers. I'm sure they're used for other kind of things. So let's start with cultural anthropology and how people go about their business. And of course, the first thing you have in your toolkit as a cultural anthropologist is the perspective of cultural relativity. And when you start to recognize the cultural patterns in another culture, they may be very different from yours. And this is where cultural relativity, the idea that you are not going to judge those patterns as one way or another, but to observe them and understand them from the point of view of the people who you're studying, okay, not from your own point of view. So you need to have that ability to look at a behavior or look at a cultural pattern and and describe it from other people's point of view, the other's point of view. And that cultural relativity is actually used by all anthropologists, that perspective. Okay. Uh, and it's an important idea that's going to come up actually throughout the course. What cultural anthropologists are after here is to gain a rapport with the community that they're working in. One way it's been described is as you have to learn how to try to be a fly on the wall. Okay, to let people act their natural way without you being there to affect their behavior in some way. Okay, so and that's something that takes a little bit of time. So when I did my own research in cultural anthropology, I felt that I had that the role as I gained a rapport, and I was able to sort of blend into the background when it just takes a little bit of time. They get used to you being there, and you truly do become the fly on the wall. And of course, your goal as a cultural anthropologist is not just to observe those behaviors as being different, but to describe that community. Okay, now the book talks about the work of Bronislaw Malinowski, who he didn't mean to go and do this kind of research, but he was kind of forced to when he went to the Trobriand Islands off the coast of Papua New Guinea in the South Pacific. And he went there. This was during World War One, and he had a hard time getting off the island because there was a war going on. And so he stayed there for a really long time. And one of the things he discovered is that if he didn't stay there as long as he did, it was at least over a year, he wouldn't have gotten the insights that he needed. And so, ever since that time, anthropologists have endeavored to study other cultures for a minimum of 1 year, to be immersed in that other culture for a minimum of 1 year. So what the cultural anthropologists are going to do, they're going to be doing interviews. They're going to, of course, participating in all different kind of cultural activities and observing at the same time. They're going to be doing mapping. Map out the village, map out the island, map out the spatial differences between what's going on there. And you write down everything. There's nothing that's not irrelevant. Note taking is a big activity that you're going to do on a daily basis. There's nothing that is insignificant. Okay, so everything is data. And of course, what you're also going to do as a cultural anthropologist is to do that work in the language of the people that you're studying. And so, what I did in rural Haiti is I learned to acquire, and I mastered as best I could, Haitian Creole. Okay, and so I spoke Creole, mpaka pale tankurat, impale tanku c'est un blanc. Now, if you understand Haitian Creole, you're laughing right now. But what I basically said is I don't speak like a native. I speak like somebody who's not from Haiti. Okay, all right. Um, the other thing that's happening now, a new way of doing cultural anthropology, is doing multi-site anthropology. And so in my own work, I just didn't do work in Fande Blanc in rural Haiti, where I did 18 months of research. I ended up collecting even more data in Stamford, Connecticut, Boston, Massachusetts, and Montreal, Quebec, because that's where people went. From the valley where I did my work, they emigrated to those, and I continued to do my work. So I had multi-sited, and your book talks about doing multi-sited kinds of cultural anthropology. Okay, let's move on to linguistics, and linguistics is a big part of what a lot of linguists are doing today. Is they are still documenting languages, which is documenting new languages and writing down, how those languages are spoken. Another big effort that linguistic anthropologists are doing is in trying to preserve languages that are being lost and recording those languages, and also here to understand how that language comes together and how the meaning of words changes. You also need to be there for a really long time. And just how cultural anthropologists need to take notes on everything. Well, if you're a linguist, you're taking notes on every utterance, on every sound. Okay, you are not just taking notes, but you're transcribing exactly what is said. And so that's something that is very in-depth kind of research. Plus, you're not just recording what is said; it's the actions, like hand moving and the gestures, the pauses and the silences, and the cadence of how conversation goes. And so, linguists are going to be making those kinds of observations, including things like eye contact. Okay, the duration of eye contact, facial gestures, extra sounds that one makes during speech. All of that is going to be noted. Um, the other thing that linguists are going to be studying also are music. Okay, and other ways of communicating, signs, posters, billboards, things, graffiti. In my own work in rural Haiti in Fande Blanc, people used to put graffiti up on the two or three buildings. There are only two or three buildings where you could actually paint something up on. um, or taking if there was a concrete wall along the road, and that and graffiti often tells us a lot about what is going on culturally, the problems that people are having, or the political point of view, and that tells us a lot. And linguists are going to take that into account, okay, um, as well as music and song, okay. Now, doing archaeology is kind of extensive, okay, because it's not just doing an excavation; it's getting permission to do the excavation. It's getting money to do the excavation. You often need a team of people to do archaeology. You may need a geologist. You may need a biologist. You may need somebody a zoologist. Depends on what kind of archaeology you're doing. You may need somebody who can do forensics. And so putting together the team and getting that funded and getting the permission to do that work is pretty extensive. Okay. And what are you looking at when you're looking at what are archaeologists actually looking at? Well, for one, before you even get into the field, you want to see what documentation there is. You want to do just sort of a walking the landscape first to see what kind of features there are. Okay, how that landscape was altered by humans before you actually even make any kind of a what they call a test pit uh, in various plots to sort of think about where you may in fact actually excavate. You may do ground penetrating radar. You may need satellite images of that area, and so to pick the best spot to actually do that, and all of that work that you do up to the excavation provides the broad context necessary to that's going to be necessary to interpret whatever you find. Okay, and that's it's everything. It's so important. So once you start digging, of course, you have methods like stratigraphy, which is simply put, the deeper you go, the older it is. You may have to do some chemical analysis, like carbon dating of what you're finding. You may need a genetic analysis if you're finding bones. Um, and once you get anything out of the ground, that starts the process of analysis, which could take as long as the actual excavation. So you may excavate for 6 months. You may be in the lab, okay, washing over your artifacts and putting things back together for maybe another 6 months before you could even write a word about what some of your findings are. One of the more interesting kinds of places where archaeologists like to do their excavations, and your book talks about this, is burial sites. Okay, whether they are known cemeteries or burial sites that are previously found, like the African burial ground in Lower Manhattan, or the Revolutionary War burial ground that was found at the Fishkill Depot in Orange County, New York. Uh, there were an untold number of Revolutionary War soldiers were buried there at what used to be a hospital that was kind of there where they kind of kept that location secret from the British, of course. Okay. Um, and of course, a really big thing in archaeology is dating, not just radiocarbon dating, but potassium argon dating, and looking at and after you're doing the dating, you're interpreting what you find. And for archaeologists, um, there's one tradition that was in the beginning of the 20th century. We would call that a traditional kind of archaeology where you're just finding things and putting them in museums. But then in the mid 20th century, we got onto what we call processual archaeology. And that processual archaeology is, you were saying, here's this pottery. Wow, how was it made? Wow, look what they did here. But now we're getting into what we refer to as post processual archaeology. And that's asking the question of not how it was made, not so much how it was made, but who made it and why. Does it reflect in any way hierarchy within that society? Does it reflect in any way a deeper meaning of a transcendental understanding? Does it have a political intent of what you're finding? And those are the kind of interpretations that archaeologists are making today. Now, the last one is biological anthropology, and there's a few different kinds of biological anthropology. There is molecular anthropology, that is biological anthropologists who focus on genetics, and that's one part of a team sometimes, right? You also have primatologists who study primates and who can tell us something about human behavior and how human societies get together. And that's another kind of biological anthropology. And then there's paleoanthropology, and those are the folks who are after fossils and artifacts of previous kinds of humans, of human origins that we're going to get into in the next couple of chapters. And so between molecular anthropologists, primatologists, paleoanthropologists, those are three different kinds. Another kind is a bioanthropologist, that is somebody who focuses on human biology, looking at famines or looking at the impact of plagues that would have on a population. And that is actually a really big area for biological anthropology. And a lot of those fields takes an understanding of zoology, of of physiology, of anatomy, of taxonomy, and you use that knowledge, that pure scientific knowledge, to understand the human experience, either in terms of disease, either in terms of genetic, how genes function within populations, looking at human origins and how populations have moved, how migrations happen, not just migrations out of Africa, which we'll talk about in a couple of chapters down the road, but also migrations of all Europeans who migrated to the Americas and the impact they had on Native Americans who migrated here 15,000 years ago. Okay, a real important part of biological anthropology and also of archaeology is who owns the artifacts, who owns the fossils, who owns the hair samples, the gene samples. And what's super important here is to understand that those the source of those items, whether it's a fossil or an artifact or a blood or hair, is the 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 the, the other. The people who are being studied own them. You, as the anthropologist, do not own them, and you could only do things with them on the permission of the people who you collected them from. Okay. By the way, that even goes for photographs. And so all the photographs I took in Fontainebleau, I know I have them, but I really can't use them, especially in a publication, without the direct permission of the person who I took a photograph of. Okay. Now, if uh, in this idea of understanding who owns things is recent in the past generation, okay, in the past 20 or 30 years. And this is the process of where your text, chapter 2, talks about the decolonization of anthropology. All right. And if we go back to the case study of Banaba, that was a part of the colonial period where people were forcibly removed from that island so phosphate could be mined on that island. That was a part of the colonial process. The decolonization of Banaba would be to now recognize what happened to the people who were removed to the island of Fiji and understanding the process that they have gone through over the past couple of generations since the 1940s of having to live away from their homeland and recognizing that and everybody acknowledging that, and that's a part of the decolonization. It's an example of decolonization in anthropology, that case study of Banaba. Boy, that's a great example for an exam question. Okay, great. There's chapter 2 on doing anthropology for the human story.